and welcome to Changing World. My name is Anthony Smith, and today I'm delighted to present a new guest to the show in the name of Mr. Ira Wolfe. Now, Mr. Wolfe is a renowned expert in the field of recruiting, hiring, and managing today's workforce. He's a well-known speaker, podcaster, and has appeared on Tedx. He's also the founder and president of Success Performance Solutions, which is a human resources consultancy firm for small and medium-sized businesses. His appearance on Tedx inspired him to write his latest book entitled Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. So Ira, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much, Anthony, and certainly the show Changing World is probably an understatement of where we are today and some of the things we're going to talk about.
I think that's very true, Ira, and a good point you made there. Now, coming back to the book, the book which has a title, a rather intriguing title, Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. Could you explain to the viewers exactly what that means and how does it relate to the big changes which are obviously affecting the recruitment industry as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity. In 2000, just kind of backtracking a little bit, in 2008, I published a book. It's called Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, and at that time, for those people who were around and in business, they probably remember that the millennials were just beginning to come into the workforce. There were a lot of disruptions. We were going through, great recession, economic change. But we had these four generations in the workplace, and we simultaneously had technology starting to come on board. The internet was now pretty well full-blown. We've already been through the dot-com boom, but we just had a lot of changes going on, but everybody seemed to have been pointing to the millennials as the cause of all the problems in the workplace and the world, frankly. I joke about that quite a bit. But I wrote about the four generations, and I wrote about technology, and that's where I came up with the term Googlization. And it really was just a broad term because we tend to Google everything. It represented, far more than just Google, but it was really representative of the convergence of all the technologies and all the changes that we experienced. I had really wanted to kind of update the book. As you said, I did a Tedx, and that was about the kind of the future of work. The title of the Tedx was Make Change Work for You, and it was about the VUCA world we live in. For those that aren't familiar with the term VUCA, it's an acronym VUCA, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I wanted to update the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization and talk, and add about Gen Z. But when I got into it, and especially with the TED Talks, I realized that there was so much more that was going on. I was much more passionate about the change that we were experiencing and what the future of work and the future of jobs and just the future of society was going to look like. So I started to write the book, and the first title ended up as a subtitle as the book. It was called When the Shift Hits Your Plan. We got to be careful when we say that.
Very good.
When the shift hits your plan.
Exactly.
And frankly, I changed it to the recruiting in the age of Googlization because that's also the world I live in. I love speaking about the future, but I also work with clients on a day-to-day basis, and so I basically just flipped it around, and instead of talking about generations, we talked about what recruitment would be like, and it's interesting because I just got it was a post. It was actually on LinkedIn for anyone that's there, and if anybody's interested, certainly you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the one area I spend quite a bit of time. And he selected my book. I was very honored and humbled. He selected my book as one of his top 5 favorite books. But in it, he basically said the book is really 2 books in one. One was about the change we're going to experience or are experiencing. And then the second half of the book was how do you recruit in that environment. So I think recruiting in the age of Googlization is about disruption in work and careers and business. And then the second part is how does that impact the ability of companies to hire and recruit, as well as individuals to obtain good work, meaningful work that they're looking for.
Yes, that's obviously highly relevant to the current situation that we're going through, and I'm sure it will be for many decades to come. So, can I just backtrack a little bit, because I was intrigued about the career that you've had. You started your career as a dentist, and I believe you were in dentistry for quite a number of years. 18 years, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. You've done your homework. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, can I put this question to you? How did you manage to make the transition from dentistry to becoming a leading expert in the field of recruiting?
Well, the transition for me, at least in my mind, was not as dramatic. It certainly has evolved from, I left dentistry 24 years ago, 1995. But from the beginning, from the outset, I had always thought I would do some consulting, although it was intended to help other dentists, maybe physicians, other professionals, run their business better. In fact, the first name of my consulting company was Busy Practice. It was BUSI Practice, and it was really the kind of the subtitle of that was putting business in practice. I loved everything, and for anyone who watches the TED Talk, you'll hear this. I loved everything about dentistry but dentistry.
Right.
I loved building the practice. Started from scratch in a very, very tough economic time for anybody who was around in the summer of 1980, at least in the U.S. Gold hit, for the first time hit 800. It used to be about $100. Silver, there were shortages of silver because there was a run. Mortgage rates were in the high teens. So there was a really challenging time. And here I was borrowing close to $100,000 to open a practice in a small town where there were 9 dentists already existing. And when I started, it really was a business. I grew up in a family of retailers, so we always talked about being part of a community. So I got involved in the community. I paid attention to the needs of the community. People said they couldn't find a dentist that was available during the evening on Saturdays, emergencies. They didn't treat kids. They didn't do root canals. And I had additional training outside of dental school. I was in the public health service for 2 years, and I had a hospital residency. So I had some additional training, so I was able to do a lot more procedures than normal. But part of that was really listening to the customer. Taking care of the customer, delivering, the best possible customer service that you can possibly have. And I often joke, and I said, oftentimes I probably had a marketing company that just happened to be a dental practice, because my very first newsletter went out in the fall of 1980, just 2 months after I opened. So I always communicated a lot. I always tried to extend a lot of services to the customers. We had hours that were convenient to them, not to me, and the practice just grew. I mean, we ended up starting from scratch with nothing, with nothing, with one of the largest practices in our area. However, it also meant that I had to do other work. And not that I don't enjoy working. I'm still, I still put a lot of hours in every day and every week, but I just didn't enjoy the end product. So my daughter graduated college in June, and in July I looked at my partner who I brought in and said, one of us is leaving. I'll either buy you out and sell it, or I'm going to leave and you can purchase it, and that's what happened. But the skills that I learned, what I did was transferable, and that's why
Right.
your question is a good one, and I get asked it a lot. I really enjoy solving problems. I've got good
Yeah.
critical thinking skills. I hone that skills. I used to get paid a lot of money to do differential diagnosis, which is what they call critical thinking in medicine. But I developed a good sense of critical thinking, good relationship skills, emotional intelligence, empathy,
Yeah.
business acumen. Those skills are transferable. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you do. You can transfer those skills, and that's what I did.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting story, and it just goes to show that it's kind of, you could almost say, their life skills that you were building up, which you used as a springboard in order to launch the career that you now have.
That's so true, because, and I know you talk about this all the time. People have technical skills. There's certainly manual. People have manual labor skills in the trades. They're excellent skills, and they'll be needed somewhat in the future. There's certainly some of the trades aren't going to be replaced by machines and robots real quickly. But as we move on, the skills that they look at, what are the human skills? What is going to keep someone at work having a good, meaningful job that can't be automated, they can't be replaced by a machine? And that is the critical thinking. It's empathy, it's emotional intelligence,
Yep.
it's relationship building skills, it's curiosity. Those are the skills that really haven't been taught in really in education or at work or even at home for years and years and years. It was get a skill, get a degree, and that's what you'll do the rest of your life. And that phase of our history is going away pretty fast.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Now we're no longer expected to have a career for life. We're expected to be career mobile. And that may or may not be a problem for people. Whether this is going to be easy for people to adapt to in the future obviously depends on the sort of training that they're given, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And I've been always somewhat curious. I think I've become more curious with age. I mean, I was always, a good student and always interested to learn, but maybe my scope was a bit narrow. I sort of became an expert in what I liked, but I didn't pursue a lot of other, not that I was narrow-minded, but, there was certain things I just didn't see the importance of. And now it seems that my curiosity has peaked, and I just don't have enough time to kind of pursue the depth of that. But in the business, part of my business is we do a lot of testing. We do pre-employment and leadership testing. And one of the areas that I focused on the last few years, and we just actually I just got certified in a new program, and it's about curiosity. And it's just our nature, what is going to differentiate a human being from a robot. What is going to keep a human being in their job is going to be the level of their curiosity. And unfortunately, schools and parents and society and business has sort of squelched it. There was an article published this week on Cornerstone. It's Cornerstone On Demand rework, if anybody's interested. And that's what I wrote about. I wrote about how society and our parents and our schools really squash our curiosity, because it's like, don't ask so many stupid questions. Just do your work. Keep your head down. You're new around here. Just do what we tell you. That is now a problem, because curiosity, as it turns out, drives everything. I mean, even upskilling. I'm sure you've had people talk about the need for upskilling, that everyone needs to upskill. Which is either learning new skills for a new career or improving the skills that they have. But in order to upskill, that individual needs to be somewhat curious. They have to want to learn, and in order to learn, You have to ask questions. It can't be spoon-fed anymore. Critical thinking skills is driven by curiosity. Even empathy is driven by curiosity. And empathy is, kind of walking in somebody else's shoes, whether it's compassion or empathy. But the reality is, if I don't care, if I'm not curious about the other person, if I don't care what that other person thinks, then I'm not going to develop empathy. And I think the number one skill that is coming down, curiosity drives empathy. But if you look at any job, any list of what are the skills of the future, what are the skills that will keep a human safe from having their job replaced by a robot or a machine, it always comes down to empathy. Empathy is on every single list, as well as critical thinking. But I think as machines get better, artificial intelligence and machine learning, even critical thinking may go away. But the one thing that everybody seems to agree with is that it will be a long, long time before a machine can display empathy. So, curiosity seems to be the driver of that. But people need to be worried. There's a lot of statistics out there. The one that I tend to gravitate to, probably because it's easier to remember, is that 1/3 of all jobs will be at least, or 2/3 of all jobs will be at least 1/3 automated. And that, and again, I say this facetiously, that does not mean that at the end of 25 hours or 30 hours each week that you get to go home and kick your feet up. Mm-hmm. It means that you're going to have to learn more and different skills in order to still be productive and have a full-time job. And people seem to really be struggling with that. Been in business, I still hear it. I've been in business for 25 years. I don't understand why I have to learn these things. Or I just spent $100,000 getting a degree. What's it good for? Yeah. Again, it's going to be curiosity and learning these other skills, which are really not taught in traditional education.
Exactly. I think we have to accept that they're not being taught. Education has its place, and I don't regret having an education myself, because I can see a lot of that that knowledge is useful, practical things as well as cerebral matters. So I certainly don't regret having an education, but as you say, the message I'm getting from you is that the education that we do get is not sufficient. Is that correct?
Well, the whole education system, and again, I can speak more from North America, especially the U.S. And I think most Western countries or Western developed countries are probably in a similar state. But yeah, the education system really is being disrupted on many fronts. The subjects that are being taught, it's expensive. It's fairly expensive to educate students. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are left behind. But the curriculum needs to be revamped. The way people learn needs to be revamped. There's again lots of online learning. There's a lot of competition with when we talk about education, we're obviously talking about the traditional kind of elementary through high school, that K through 12 or 13, whichever it is in different countries. And then you have post-secondary, you have college, and then you have trades. But so much of that now is continuous learning, micro-learning. Traditional colleges are having a lot of competition. The old MBA that people got, especially in business, is certainly now people are questioning whether it's worth its value. So it'll be interesting, but the education industry is certainly being disrupted quite a bit.
Exactly. And I think if you do some research in the internet, on the internet, on the web, you can't help but notice there are so many online courses available now for just about any topic you could imagine.
Yeah, I've even, speaking of recruiting in the age of Googlization, I actually just launched today an online course, and it's really an LMS learning library. And a lot of what I've been speaking about in at conferences and one-on-one with people or doing as webinars was really putting a lot of that content into some type of a system that people can access. But it's not that I'm going to disrupt the entire industry, but it goes to show you that almost anyone today can compete with the university, would compete with another system. And it's amazing. I mean, I can't remember the exact number. Because it keeps going up. But I think is it 4 billion hours of video are watched daily on YouTube worldwide, and about half of those are how do you do something. It's not all about cat videos, people watching cats and dogs and crazy things. Yeah. But there's a massive number of videos, and just like this podcast.
Exactly.
So if somebody wants to learn about the future, they just go to YouTube. That's become an education system. So a lot of the businesses are starting to recognize that and focus on micro learning now. To be able to have these short videos, get people what they need when they need it on something as easy as a mobile phone.
This is the thing. We have the technology right there at our fingertips. And one thing I have noticed over this past decade or so is that if you wind the clock back, let's say 15 to 20 years, video on the internet was at such an early stage that you could only see kind of very, low res video, and there was hardly anything available. And then gradually video came into its own, because now back then you didn't even have sufficient bandwidth. Mm-hmm. Video is so bandwidth intensive, whereas today we have super fiber broadband. We can stream just about any video formats. They can even do 4K videos. So this has opened up such a huge opportunity for being able to visually communicate information rather than just verbally or written communication. So it's as you well know, it's a fact that our brains are wired to process visual information far better than reading a book, for example.
It's significant that visually, we're visual learners, and I know some people, need to see it or touch it or feel it as well. But we are visual learners, and the retention rate from watching a video, seeing something performed rather than somebody, either standing up and describing it, but not showing you actually what the product is or the how-to. The retention rate is astronomically improved. When somebody sees something being done, than describing it. But you mentioned something before. Going back, you said about 20 years. I mean, you got to realize. I mean, 20 years ago, there were many people still on dial-up. So we couldn't. The bandwidth just wasn't there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the point that people miss, and this really was where Googlization came in, and if anybody reads the first half of my book, it has nothing to do with recruitment. We talk about work and jobs, but it really has to do with the convergence of so many things. So I think one of the best examples of talking about how things converge, and it wasn't just that we have better broadband and video, and that's why we do that. But we do it because we now have mobile devices. So the mobile devices, 20 years ago, we still had sort of a brick, we had a brick phone or a flip phone, and there was no way to view on your phone. Now we really don't have phones anymore. We have mini computers in our pocket. But think about Uber or Lyft or these ride-sharing programs. Yeah. People say, that's a brand new idea. Well, no, it's not an idea. It's a taxi that we've had for decades. Yeah. And the idea for rideshare actually came up about 25 or 30 years ago. But we didn't have the bandwidth. the fact that I didn't have to call a phone number, I didn't have to dial a phone, I can just use it in an app, really came because of the convergence of technology, of satellite systems, of mapping, the ability, the artificial intelligence that was behind the mapping of these services. And then again, I believe I said bandwidth, but then it also was the development of the smartphone. The smartphone allowed all this to happen. So Steve Jobs, when the iPhone came out 2007, that allowed the opportunity to build an app. The maps that Google and other companies basically were able to do, map the entire universe, the Earth, of places to go. It's the convergence of all these ideas.
Yeah.
That happens. Singly, it doesn't make a difference, right? Uber, Lyft, rideshare is no different than a taxi, but it completely disrupted an industry. And that's also what made, Netflix was able to disrupt the, Blockbuster, and Airbnb is able to disrupt the hotel industry. It's the convergence of all this activity. And people continually miss that. They go, well, I don't use video, or I don't have a smartphone. Great, that's fine. But that's one piece of a big, big puzzle.
Exactly. And this is why, with all these technologies making so much advancement, it seems like it could be so difficult to predict what may happen in the future. I mean, another interesting technology is that of research into longevity. Mm-hmm. There are people now saying that if you're just being born now, you're going to live possibly, the average lifespan for people just being born could be well over 120 years on average.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're probably of a similar age, and I remember when they used to announce again, living in the U.S., so they had a Today Show, and in the morning my mother would have it on, and they announce at one of the breaks, one person in the U.S. turned 100 years old. Now they have a rolling screen.
Right.
Yeah, it's my mother is my brother will be 96, or she is 96. My father-in-law is 94. Yeah. She's pretty healthy. She's actually ironically moving back into her own apartment. She wasn't independent living, hated it. She thought there were too many old people there. So she's moving back independently. Certainly has that capability of doing that, but she's not the exception. I mean, she has many, many friends that are in their 90s, some in their hundreds, that still have a fairly active lifestyle. Yeah. So I think 120 years is probably conservative. So we have longevity, and that part of that's going to come from convergence. It's going to come from genomics, certainly our ability to kind of doctor the DNA. Yeah. But it's also 3D printing. You used to die before if you didn't have a lung or a liver or a kidney or a heart. Now they can 3D manufacture the parts, and place them in there with a very, very high success rate. So again, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 3D printing, autonomous sensors with autonomous vehicles, all those, everything. In one sense, it's exciting and it's terrifying. Simultaneously.
Yes. I mean, I suppose the thing we have to look forward to is improved quality of life, which if you're going to live to be 100 and you have a very poor quality of life, you could argue that it's simply not worth it. But if the quality of life can be significantly improved, that to live to 100 is thoroughly enjoyable.
It is, but I know from my mother and my father-in-law, both sometimes struggle with that. I mean, I've heard them both say they feel that they've lived too long at times because society has not kept up. Healthcare has not kept up with that. Transportation has not kept up. So there's a lot of, so we continue to move faster and people will live longer, and on I'd say it's more than paper, but for argument's sake, is that they do have a better quality of life, but because of infrastructure, because of people have outlived their retirement funds or what they've saved, because healthcare is most expensive in the last year of life. There's a lot of challenges we have not met yet.
Right.
It's promising because there's a whole group that believes in abundance. That technology will make everything almost for free. Things that cost an enormous amount of money now will not cost that much in the future because of technology, and therefore, pharmaceuticals and medication and transportation aren't an issue. Then, sure, our quality of life, but we're sort of living in that disruptive phase between we got one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And anybody living in the present is sort of struggling, being torn in a lot of directions. So I think the future could be, could be that world of abundance and world of prosperity, and much healthier, longer quality of life. But on the short term, we really have some human issues. Issues that humans need to deal with, human issues that humans need to deal with.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with a lot of things over in the U.S. You're dealing with a lot of things in the U.K. with Brexit.
Exactly.
That is time consumption, and where we should be focused on the human beings, it's not. A lot of it's focused on policies and process and politics. So hopefully. Some of these other issues can get resolved, and people can go back to paying attention to what needs to be, what they need to be paying attention to.
That's a very good point. I mean, all these rules, regulations, red tape, too much political upheaval, all these things are kind of counterproductive, aren't they? I mean, if there wasn't so much of that, you could argue more progress could be made, because it seems like we're just problems and things that take so long to get resolved.
Well, they're distracting for sure. I
mean,
we still, despite the fact that we can live more days and longer years, we still only have 24 hours in a day. And there's only so many things that we can possibly do. And, and again, there's, the people that are leaders of the country, they in one respect, we got to thank them for the amount of time and investment that they have. But a lot of them are out of touch. They make rules for technology because they don't understand what the technology can do. Hopefully, some of them may listen to this conversation and, develop some curiosity. But it is worrisome and at times terrifying of how out of touch many of the people that make our rules and regulations are, and they can't put the toothpaste back in the tube using my old career. They can't put the toothpaste back in the tube when it comes to technology. So one of my presentations is called, I talk about is keeping the human in HR, keeping the H in HR. And one of the solutions is to create a council, some type of council of people, and it could be insiders and outsiders. Surround yourself with experts, not that you agree with them all, but get their point of view of what the future is going to look like. How is technology going to impact that? Impact you or others? And again, people just want to put their head in their sand. It's like, oh, I get so confused, and my brain hurts when I hear you talk about it, and then they just don't do anything about it. It's going to happen one way or the other. But you do have to be a lot smarter and contribute. Ask the questions that need to be asked, because again, a lot of these things are going to change our life for the better, but some are going to disrupt privacy and our protections and how we live.
Yeah, and that's already happening in many respects. And I think, to be honest, a lot of people feel a bit powerless. They feel that the government decides everything and we're just pawns, and we can't really, do any. We can express our views, but we don't get listened to quite often. Is that something you go along with?
As you were saying that, I would somewhat agree, and then I'm going to disagree.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of people that are extremely naive about what all this means. When you bring up something like artificial intelligence, or you talk about some of these things, I say this often. I wasn't the originator of this, but that science fiction and reality are blurring. The lines between science fiction and reality are blurring, and it's true. That doesn't mean you can throw your hands up and just say I don't like it. Everybody needs to be a little bit more knowledgeable about that.
Yeah.
So in some respects, I think the rules and the regulations are made because people are naive and they're not pushing back. Because if you look at the power of social media, you look at the power of what some people can do, you do not have to be a large organization with millions of people in it to affect policy. If everyone is concerned about how fast and how disruptive some of these technologies are, then it basically becomes a groundswell from the bottom up. So everybody really has a voice. If you're not in the majority, then some of your views may be crushed. But I think people are naive. They don't know what to ask. They're not knowledgeable about it enough. They just get tired talking about all this technology, and because they don't think it's going to happen in their lifetime. I did a talk just a few weeks ago, a keynote, and it was Workforce 2030. And in it, I said that what anybody expects is going to happen by 2030 will probably happen by 2025. And what we really should be thinking about by 2030 is what most people think will happen in 2050. So the time span, the change is accelerating so fast that the anticipation for what's going to be 10 years out is probably going to happen in 5, and what is going to happen 30 years out is probably, in 10 or 15. And because I still hear this. I mean, there's too many people that just think that they're not going to live long enough to see all the change that's coming down, and that's just absolutely not true.
Okay, well, I do take your point there. And I suppose another consequence of that is that you're going to have such a wide spectrum of people, going from those who, like you just used the phrase, bury their heads in the sand, going to the other end of the spectrum, which is the people who are right on the cutting edge and, right up there, studying the latest technology, the latest trends, and how that can be applied, and what the new inventions are going to mean. There's obviously new inventions coming out all the time with major implications for the future. So it seems to me that the spectrum of people between those who are right up there on the cutting edge and those who are lagging behind and falling behind, it's widening. It's not narrowing, is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the U.S. about wage inequality. That's certainly widening. It is related to people who have the technical skills or the trade skills versus those who do not. So there's certainly a wage gap, not only a gender gap, but a wage gap between the trades and the jobs. That's only going to increase as we need to learn more and better skills and adapt those. So there are some, I want necessarily, I guess one way of phrasing it might be collateral damage of all this, is that unless we address it, the socioeconomic gaps are going to increase. The wage inequality is going to increase because there are going to be, people who have and people who have not, and that the middle class has been going away for years. But that's certainly going to be a dangerous outcome of where we're headed. And unless we address that, and again, we're going back to education, upskilling, changes in government policies, understanding technology. Everybody needs to participate.
Sure. I don't know if you've heard of the phrase. One prediction which I've heard bandied about is that we may end up with a situation where people are just because technology will just take over so much. I'm talking, maybe decades in the future now, but there could come a point where the technology takes over and does virtually everything for us, and then the government or the governing body will decide to just hand out a universal basic income to everybody,
Yep.
and just say that we provide enough for you to live a comfortable life. Technology will produce everything that you need. It's kind of a bit daunting to think of that. But is that? Do you think that is a possibility that it could go that way?
Well, I can't say no, but I don't think the chances in my lifetime or your lifetime. I think if you're talking about that, you're talking a century out. There's some people said talk about 2030, 2040. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
Because in order to do that, people still want to have a meaningful life. They want to have purpose. And in an ideal world, if you're talking about taking all 8 billion people on the planet and everybody has good health, they have access to water. We don't even have access to water right now. Not us, but there's areas in the world that don't have access to clean water, good education. You need that to have meaningful work or a meaningful life. And there's people in the U.S. That certainly we have a lot of people living in poverty. People are uneducated. People are low income. They don't have access to health care. They don't have access to quality food and quality water. And we're living in the 21st century. So I think we got a long way to go until that happens. And then there's that argument of, well, that sounds like a socialist state, that everybody has a meaningful life and everybody gets at least the minimum level of income. I don't know how the politics of that, I don't know how the sociological aspects of that perspective is going to play out. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over decades. So if we can move forward 2 centuries, I can't say it can't happen.
Yeah.
But boy, I think there's just a lot in the short term that's just it isn't going to work out that way.
Yeah.
I think it's a good goal.
Well, it's one possible scenario, and that, as you say, that could be a very long way off.
Yeah.
And
I think everybody's entitled to a quality of life, access to care, access to quality water, having a roof over their head. I think those. If that happens, that's great. But how that happens, what the economies of the world look like, how we make livings at that point, we can talk about it, but I think that's pretty hypothetical. But until we figure out how everybody can be safe and we can protect ourselves and again, just to have a higher quality of life, which means having a higher quality of education, having access to jobs, or whether that's funded by hard work or whether that's funded by a minimum basic income, they're all part of the solution. But they're also all part of a problem.
Yep, I can well go along with you on that one. Is there anything that you'd like to add as far as making predictions into the future? A certain amount of speculation involved, of course, but is there anything that sort of really stands out? A point that you'd like to make, which you think will be helpful to the people listening in, as regards what the future may bring and how can we prepare for that?
I speak. I've got a lot of friends who are futurists, and I follow this all the time. And every single one of them says we can't predict the future. So, from that sense, but I guess from some. And maybe that's more on the exact end of what exactly is going to happen. What I'm very comfortable saying, especially over the next 10 years, which is, what is going to impact almost anybody listening to this, would be that change is going to happen a lot faster. It's going to be more disruptive. What we considered our norms is going to, become abnormal real quickly, and things that we considered that would never be normal will all of a sudden be accepted as part of that. So I think the fact is that people still live on this linear world, that they still think that when there's a disruption, it will something disrupts their life or their community or their business, and that the new whatever replaced that caused it will kind of run another 20 or 30 years. So it's like, okay, I'm willing to accept it this time, but and I'll go along with you. The problem that we've got right now is that the half-life of technology is like 3 years. So instead of getting disruptions every century or every few decades, they're happening every few years. And we've got to be really careful with that. And so I would just urge everybody to become much more comfortable with, understand technology. Everybody should start to upskill a bit. And again, if you're really looking to kind of be safe, critical thinking is certainly one skill, but I think just human skills, that, the ability to relate to other people, being human, being curious, will go a long way.
Okay, Ira. Well, thank you very much for being present today to answer my questions. And I must say I found that a very fascinating conversation. And thank you very much for everybody for listening in, and we'll speak to you again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony, and everyone.